Hi everyone, I'm Leanne and today I'm going to be reviewing all of the books that I read in June. So I read 10 books in the month of June, so bang on target for the number of books that I want to be reading every month. And something I'm very pleased about, I read all of the books that I pulled out of my TBR jar. So let's start with one of those. I read Arthur and Teddy Are Coming Out by Ryan Love, and I really enjoyed this one. So this is essentially a family story where we are introduced to the family when the grandfather comes out as gay at the age of 79, and that is Arthur. Following Arthur coming out, Teddy, who is his grandson, so he's in his early 20s, he is confronted with his own feelings around wanting to come out but not feeling comfortable or ready to do so. And we look at the differences but also similarities that they face in their experiences. We see a spectrum of reactions to Arthur coming out, some wholly accepting but also some unfortunate and upsetting opinions. And whilst the book acknowledges that Teddy has a number of opportunities and privileges that his grandfather didn't have when he was his age, it certainly doesn't portray Teddy's life as easy. I thought the relationship between these two male characters of different generations was really tenderly told. I found myself feeling angry and frustrated by some of the reactions that they face, and I felt this in quite a visceral way, which is how I know that they were crafted really powerfully, because it elicited such a reaction from me. And I think while the book didn't shy away from some of the difficult topics, it was overall a really hopeful novel. I don't think I've ever read a book about a man coming out at that later stage in his life, and I got a lot of value from reading about that experience. So another book I picked out from the TBR jar was Happy Place by Emily Henry. So this is about Harriet and Wynne, who on the surface seem like they are the perfect couple. Every year they and their circle of friends take a trip together, they go on holiday together. However, this year that comes with a lot of complications for the pair because they have actually split up and none of their friends have been told. So they find themselves in this charade of pretending that they are still in a relationship when they are not. I have to say, I think this is my least favorite Emily Henry that I've read so far. I typically quite enjoy fake dating as a trope, so I quite enjoy seeing two people acting out what they perceive romance to be. And I did think going into this book, this would be a really interesting way of kind of adding a different dynamic to that trope. So they are pretending to be in a relationship that they used to be in. Ordinarily, I don't particularly mind miscommunication in books and in romances, because I think that is just part of life. You know, miscommunication happens because humans have this way of just being unable to say what they actually feel. But I actually found it quite frustrating on this occasion. With romances, you ultimately know what the conclusion is going to be, right? You know that the couple are going to get together at the end. So we know that this couple are ultimately going to reunite. And for whatever reason, I just didn't feel particularly invested in that. Maybe it's a very personal reaction. I just know that, like, if a relationship ended for me, there would be no going back. So maybe it is just very personal. Emily Henry fans, let me know down in the comments what you thought of this one. I hope you guys enjoyed this one more than I did. I also read Green Dot by Madeline Gray, so you would have heard me talk about this one in my bisexual book recommendations video. So this is about Hera, who is in her mid-20s and she's working in an office job that she doesn't particularly care about. She is moderating the comments sections for like a newspaper, and the only real source of entertainment that she has in that job is this relationship that she strikes up with a much older and far more senior male co-worker. Eventually, this workplace banter develops into a full-blown affair, which is not something that Hera expected, because up until this point, she has only ever dated women. And I found that quite interesting from a queer perspective, you know, there being this one particular person that can change your perspective on your sexuality. And I heard someone talk recently about how straight people often experiment with queerness, but you don't often see it the other way around, where queer people experiment with straightness. And I don't think Hera ever defines her sexuality following her affair with a man, but I did find that an interesting way of potentially framing what it means for her. I think I got a lot of value from this book, and I think anyone that has ever been in a situationship or relationship where you ultimately know deep down that it is not going to go to the place that you want it to go to, that ultimately it is futile, you know your feelings are going to end up hurt, but you just cling on just in case. And I think the narrator has this amazing, like, self-deprecating sense of humor where she is quite self-aware of the bad decisions that she is making, and she plows ahead anyway. And again, I think anyone that has been in a romantic situation like that will relate. The pandemic does feature in this book, which was not something that I expected going into it. And I think writers are very kind of avoidant of dealing with the pandemic, and I think readers have a huge amount of hesitancy in reading anything that engages with that. And I think ultimately it's just really gonna restrict writers and readers if we do ultimately just point blank refuse to engage with it. Like, we cannot just wipe this experience away from absolutely everything. And I think the way the author managed to incorporate it while it didn't take over the story was really subtly and well done. I liked this one a lot, and I definitely want to read what Madeline Gray writes next. So I also read a classic. I read A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. So this is the second E.M. Forster book I have read this year, and I'm in. For me, I think there's something about his writing that just feels like I'm sat down having a gossip about these people's lives, and I'm thoroughly entertained. So this is about Lucy Honeychurch, which is just like the best name ever. So she heads off on a trip to Italy, and it's actually a really kind of formative experience from her, going from England to Europe, having new experiences and mixing with people that she wouldn't ordinarily mix with because of the really rigid class structure that there is in England at this time. And she's particularly impacted by a young man that she meets there who is from a lower class than her. When Lucy returns to England, she finds herself really torn between what she experienced in Europe and the really repressed middle class structures that she finds herself contained by in England. And she finds herself caught between the courtship of two men who represent either side of that divide. So like other work that I've read from E.M. Forster so far, it is really about kind of social norms and class structures in the Edwardian period, but in quite a witty, entertaining story. I also think the author discusses gender in a really interesting and progressive for the time way. I don't think this will be the last book that I read from this author this year. I now consider myself a fan. So I also read some poetry. This is Pink Witch. So this is an anthology of poems from 12 female Scottish poets. Now, going into this book, I thought it was solely about this idea of the witch, and I was invested. I like reading about witches, I like poetry, I like how the witch stands as a kind of feminist icon. But what I didn't realize before reading the introduction to this collection is that it also involves another female icon, and that is Barbie. So essentially, this book was made for me. Sometimes I think the Barbie song just plays on a loop in my head. I find the history of Barbie really interesting. I had Barbies as a child. I find the kind of cultural phenomenon of Barbie and its relation to feminism really interesting. I enjoyed the Barbie movie. With it being an anthology of a few different writers, there were definitely some that I gravitated to more than others, but that's always going to be the case with an anthology, and I think this is one that I would definitely love to revisit as well. So I also read a graphic memoir. I read Persepolis by Marjan Satrapi. So this memoir begins in 1980, and our author is 10 years old at that point. She is the outspoken child of radical Marxists living in Iran, and through the lens of this one life, we gain so much information and context around life in Iran, living amongst such a significant conflict that has so many political and religious and cultural complications. I was going to say Iran has been in the news a lot recently, but I think it's been in the news for as long as I can remember, and even prior to that. And I think reading this memoir was such a reminder that those that are most significantly impacted by conflict in the Middle East are families and civilians and children and people just trying to get on with their lives. People who are not extremists, people who face dire consequences for a conflict that they didn't sign up for. I won't claim to understand absolutely everything that I read in this book, but as I've always done with graphic memoirs, I find the form is a really excellent way of, at the very least, growing your understanding of something that is quite complicated. I think the medium of combining the text with imagery is a way that can make something quite accessible, and I think that was done really well in this book. Okay, on to some books for younger readers. I read The Boy I Love by William Hussey. This is a young adult book that also deals with conflict, but in this instance it is the First World War. So against the backdrop of this devastating war where there was such a huge loss of life, we follow an intimate story of queer love. So 19-year-old Stephen is our main character, who is not only dealing with the trauma and devastation of being a soldier at war, but he is also dealing with the loss of his first love, who was another boy. He has so many thoughts around wondering what it is that they are fighting for. He seems to be fighting for freedom, but the society around him doesn't actually seem to want freedom for him. He is surrounded by so much prejudice and so many kind of snide and sly comments about people, you know, insinuating that they think he's gay or making comments about other gay people, and so much rhetoric around it being unnatural and sinful. So really, Stephen is questioning what is this freedom that he is supposed to be fighting for. He then meets Danny. He is a young recruit, he is smart, he is talented, and the two immediately have a bond that grows throughout the course of the novel. The relationship between the two of them is so tenderly told. Not only is it heartbreaking to see how these boys are mistreated by the world around them because of their love, because of their sexuality, but it was also heartbreaking to see these young men at war. I say young men, but many of them kids, children. I was left with this overwhelming feeling of we have really learned nothing. Like, as a human race, we are still sending young people off to die. And even if they survive the horrors of those conflicts, the world that they return to doesn't reward them. I think this was an incredibly accomplished book. I do have this proof copy. I will replace it with a finished copy because I thought this book was incredible. I also read Stealing Happy by Brian Conahan. So this is about a teenage boy whose family are incredibly short on money, and it transpires that his mother has taken loans from a very dangerous loan shark. So Sonny decides to take it upon himself to try and get the money somehow, to try and steal it back, so he and his family will be free from the control and the threats of this loan shark. But Sonny isn't the most subtle of wannabe thieves because he has Tourette's. Not that helpful if you are trying to go unnoticed. I don't think I've read many, if any, books from characters that have Tourette's, so it was really great to see that representation in this, and I think the author did a great job of presenting the frustrations of living with that, but also the opportunities to lean into the humor that comes with that. I also think the author did a fantastic job of presenting the realities of not having money as a family, and this is another book that does engage with the pandemic because Sonny's father is suffering from long COVID. He's not able to work. That's why the family don't have money coming in. And again, I think in our hesitancy to engage with the pandemic, we're actually leaving lots of stories unheard. And this is the reality of lots of families, that they are dealing with this. And, you know, things like long COVID have had really significant impacts on people's lives, not only in terms of their health, but in terms of, you know, their finances. Ultimately, it is an uplifting story, but some heavy and important topics dealt with along the way. I also read The Places I've Cried in Public by Holly Bourne. So I have read loads of Holly Bourne books at this point, both her young adult books and her adult books, and for whatever reason, I actually think it might be the cover design. I wasn't particularly drawn to this one, but I'm so glad that I picked it up because, as with everything that Holly writes, but I do think her YA in particular is just like absolute first class. I think she is one of, if not the best young adult writer out there. She completely just hits the nail on the head with everything that she writes, and I found this such an impactful story that I felt a lot of resonance with. So I think her name is Amelie. I kept reading it as Amelia, but it might be Amelie. She moves from Sheffield to the south of England, leaving behind her first romantic relationship, her first love. She is a very kind of shy and reluctant but incredibly talented musician, and when she enters the school talent show, she meets a boy named Reese who was also performing. And over the course of the book, we flash forward and backward in time as Amelie revisits all of the different places that Reese made her cry in public. So we follow her reflections as she goes to these places in the present day, and also her looking back on her experiences in this incredibly intense relationship. Reese is a dickhead. He begins his relationship with Amelie by love bombing her incredibly intensely. He pursues her, to be honest, quite aggressively. He showers her with affection and over-the-top declarations of love and affection that simply can't be genuine when you have literally just met someone. We see how he engages in negging behavior. So if you don't know, negging is when typically a man will do this to a woman, or in this case a boy will do it to a girl, where there will be these kind of backhanded compliments or straight up insults that knock down the victim's confidence in order to make the victim crave validation from that person and crave praise from them. We see that Reese's unpredictable and inconsistent behavior, the way that he blows the extremes of hot and cold towards someone he is supposed to love, creates this kind of addiction that she has to him. She has these roller coaster heightened feelings, incredibly high highs and low lows that she mistakes for love. I found it so heartbreaking to watch her go through these experiences, and reading this as an approaching 30-year-old woman, I found Reese's behavior so incredibly transparent, but I only find it transparent because I've seen it before. And when you are a teenage girl, you are not well equipped enough to see those red flags even when they are blazingly waving in your face. It's only in retrospect that you see these behaviors for what they are. And these behaviors start young. They do start with teenagers, and those teenagers grow up into be grown men who are strong. If you remain in relationships with those type of people into your adulthood, the opportunities that they have for control when it becomes, financial, for instance, is so incredibly dangerous. And those behaviors do start as teenagers. I saw a lot of my younger self in our female lead in this book. I wish I had some of the wisdom that this book contains when I was younger. Okay, we've had quite a few intense books. This one's about a cat. It's called Varjacp Paw by SF Said. Varjacp Paw is a cat. He lives up in an old house on the hill. He has never left home, but his grandfather, who, surprise, surprise, is also a cat, has told him about the way, and that is the way with a capital one. It is a secret martial arts for cats. Varjacp decides to leave this house that he has always been in to learn more about the way, this secret martial arts, as he survives on the mean city streets, where he faces gangs of other cats and dangerous dogs and uncovers lots of mysteries along the way. There are many things that I enjoyed about this book. I enjoyed it being from the perspective, in many ways, of this cat character, and how that has such a unique way of allowing the reader to see the world. Like, this cat has so much naivety about the world because he's just always lived in this house. But also the illustrations that accompany this make it a really atmospheric read. I can see why this is considered a modern classic of children's literature, and I've been keen to read more animal stories for younger readers, and this one was pacey and wise and entertaining. So there we have it. They are all of the books that I read in June. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. What emoji should I get you to leave me? We've just spoken about it. Leave me a cat emoji if you don't have anything in particular to say. That's it from me. I hope you're doing well, and I'll speak to you in my next video.